The frigid November rain fell in relentless, slanting sheets, turning the city streets into a slick mirror of blurred neon lights. Huddled under the flimsy awning of a bus stop, Alara shifted her weight, trying to shield her 5-year-old son, Leo, from the wind's biting teeth. His small body, wrapped in her own thin cardigan over his coat, was a warm, precious weight against her side, his soft breaths fogging in the cold air. They were on their way home from her second job, a grueling dishwashing shift that barely covered the cost of Leo's daycare, and the exhaustion was a physical ache in her bones. "Mommy, are the angels cold too?" Leo murmured, his voice thick with sleep. His face burrowed into her hip. What could one woman, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of love, possibly do to change her fate? Before she could answer, a sharp cry sliced through the din of the traffic. Not 20 feet away, an elderly woman, elegantly dressed in a tweed coat that was no match for the sudden downpour, crumpled to the pavement. Her bag of groceries spilled across the wet concrete, apples and oranges rolling into the gutter like lost hopes. For a heartbeat, Alara was frozen. The bus was coming. She could see its headlights cutting through the gloom a few blocks away. It was the last one of the night. Missing it meant a 2-mile walk in the freezing rain, something Leo's small legs and her own weary spirit could barely handle. But the sight of the woman, so still and vulnerable on the ground, overrode everything. She was a nurse, first and foremost. It wasn't a job. It was who she was. "Stay right here, baby," she whispered to Leo, tucking her cardigan more securely around him. "Don't move." She sprinted through the rain, her worn sneakers splashing in the puddles. She knelt beside the woman, her fingers immediately going to the woman's wrist, searching for a pulse. It was there, thready but present. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Alara's voice was calm and steady, the voice she used with frightened patients and scared children. The woman's eyelids fluttered. Her skin was pale and clammy. Alara quickly assessed her, noting her shallow breathing. She gently tilted the woman's head back to clear her airway and loosened the collar of her silk blouse. Someone from a nearby coffee shop had seen the commotion and was already on the phone, calling for an ambulance. The wail of a distant siren began to grow. The bus rumbled past, its warm, lighted interior a fleeting glimpse of a world she had just sacrificed. A pang of regret hit her, sharp and cold, but she pushed it down. She had done the right thing. The woman shivered violently, her teeth chattering. Without a second thought, Alara unwound the faded, pilled scarf from her own neck, a gift from her late grandmother, her only piece of comfort, and tucked it gently around the woman's throat. "It's okay," she soothed, stroking the woman's damp, silver hair. "Help is on the way." "You're not alone," the woman's eyes opened, a pair of startlingly clear blue eyes filled with confusion and fear. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Alara simply held her hand, offering the silent, profound comfort of human connection until the paramedics arrived. As they loaded the woman onto a stretcher, Alara faded back into the shadows of the bus stop, her neck now bare to the cold. She gathered a sleepy Leo into her arms and began the long, wet walk home, the memory of the woman's grateful eyes and the forgotten warmth of her own scarf the only things keeping her from despair. Alistair Vance paced the sterile white corridor of the hospital's private wing like a caged panther. His custom-tailored suit felt like a straitjacket, his silk tie a noose. Power, he thought with a bitter taste in his mouth, was an illusion. He could command boardrooms, move markets with a single phone call, and shape the city's skyline with his developments. But he couldn't stop his mother's heart from faltering. When the doctor finally emerged, Alistair's carefully constructed facade of calm nearly shattered. "She's stable, Mr. Vance," the doctor said, his voice measured. "A transient ischemic attack. A warning shot, but she's lucid and recovering well." Frankly, she was very lucky. The young woman who found her, she knew exactly what to do. Kept her warm, cleared her airway, stayed with her. Her quick thinking likely prevented a much more serious outcome. Alistair's relief was so profound it left him dizzy. He leaned against the wall, the tension draining from his shoulders. He went into his mother's room to find her propped up against a mountain of pillows, looking frail but defiant. "Alistair, darling," Eleanor Vance said, her voice a little weak but still laced with its usual iron. "Stop looking like you're about to fire the entire medical profession." "I'm fine." He sat by her bed, taking her hand. It felt impossibly fragile in his. "I was worried." "I know," she said softly. "But there was an angel, Ollie, in the rain. She saved me." Eleanor's eyes grew misty. "She was so kind. She had a little boy with her, and she gave me her own scarf." She gestured to the foot of the bed, where the faded, worn piece of fabric lay. It looked impossibly humble amidst the starched luxury of the private suite. "I never even got her name. You have to find her." "I must thank her properly." Finding someone in a city of millions based on a vague description and a second-hand scarf was a daunting task. But for Alistair Vance, it was merely a logistical problem to be solved. He was a man who believed every problem had a price tag, a solution that could be bought and implemented. He returned to his office, the scarf carefully folded in his briefcase, and summoned his executive assistant, a woman of terrifying efficiency named Ms. Davies. He placed the scarf on his vast mahogany desk. "Find the woman who gave this to my mother," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "She was at a bus stop on 5th and Elm around 9 p.m. last night. She's a nurse or has medical training. She had a young son with her, about 4 or 5. Use whatever resources you need. I want her found by the end of the day." Ms. Davies didn't blink. "Consider it done, Mr. Vance." Within hours, she had cross-referenced CCTV footage from the intersection, identified the ambulance call, and accessed the paramedics' report, which mentioned an unidentified nurse assisting at the scene. From there, she pulled security footage from a nearby ATM that captured a clear, though rain-streaked, image of Alara and Leo walking away. Facial recognition software, combined with a search of nursing registries, did the rest. By 4 o'clock, a pristine file lay on Alistair's desk with a name, Alara Jackson, an address in a low-income housing complex, and a brief, grim summary of her employment history. He stared at her photo, at the quiet strength in her eyes, the gentle set of her mouth. This was the angel his mother spoke of. That evening, a sleek, black sedan, silent as a shadow, pulled up to the curb of a rundown apartment building where the paint was peeling and the windows seemed to weep with grime. Alistair stepped out, his polished Italian shoes looking deeply out of place on the cracked pavement. He felt a flicker of discomfort, a sensation he wasn't accustomed to. He was a man who existed in penthouses and boardrooms, not places where poverty was a palpable entity. He found apartment 3B and knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet, desolate hallway. The door opened a crack, and Alara Jackson peered out. She looked even more tired than she had in the grainy photo, with faint purple smudges under her deep brown eyes. Recognition dawned, followed swiftly by confusion. "Can I help you?" Alistair's practiced corporate charm failed him. He was used to being in control, to people knowing exactly who he was. Here, he was just a stranger in an expensive suit. "Ms. Jackson, my name is Alistair Vance. My mother, you helped her last night." Eleanor Vance. Alara's eyes widened. She opened the door fully, revealing a small, sparsely furnished room. Leo was sitting on a threadbare rug, carefully arranging a small collection of bottle caps. The room was meticulously clean, but the poverty was stark. The single, glowing space heater, the bookshelf made of cinder blocks and planks, the faint smell of boiled potatoes that hung in the air. "Is she all right?" Alara asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. It was her first question. Not, "Who are you?" or "What do you want?" but a question of pure, selfless care. It struck Alistair with unexpected force. "She's fine," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "She's recovering. Thanks to you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "My mother and I want to express our gratitude." He started to write, the pen scratching in the quiet room. Alara held up a hand, her expression firm. "Please don't." Alistair paused, looking at her. "I'm sorry. I don't want your money," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "I'm a nurse. That's what we do. We help people. I didn't do it for a reward." He stared at her, genuinely perplexed. In his world, everything had a price. Every action was a transaction. This simple, unwavering refusal was more foreign to him than any language. He saw the pride in her posture, the integrity that radiated from her like a palpable warmth. It was disarming. "I insist," he said, his default setting of command taking over. "You missed your bus. You stood in the rain. You gave my mother your scarf." "And I would do it again," she replied simply. It was the right thing to do. He was at an impasse. He had come to settle a debt, to close a loop, but she wouldn't allow it. His gaze drifted past her to Leo, who was now looking up at him with wide, curious eyes. Alistair noticed the boy's sneakers were held together with duct tape. He saw the single can of soup on the small kitchen counter. His approach was wrong. She wouldn't accept charity, but perhaps she would accept an opportunity. He put the checkbook away. "My mother will be coming home in a few days," he said, changing tactics. "The doctors recommend she have round-the-clock care for a few weeks as a precaution." A private nurse, he watched her face carefully. "The position comes with a very generous salary. And accommodations. There's a guest cottage on the estate. It would be convenient." Ilara's resolve wavered. A job. Not a handout, but a real job doing what she was trained to do. A place to live where the heat worked and the roof didn't leak. A salary that could buy Leo new shoes and fill their cupboards with food. She looked at her son, at his bright, innocent face, and the fierce, protective love she felt for him overwhelmed her pride. For him, she could swallow her misgivings about this imposing, wealthy man and his different world. "Okay," she whispered, the word barely audible. "For my son. I'll take the job." The Vance estate was less a home and more a kingdom. A long, winding driveway curved through acres of manicured lawns and ancient oak trees, leading to a sprawling stone mansion that looked like it had been plucked from the English countryside. The guest cottage Ilara and Leo were shown to was larger and more luxurious than any apartment Ilara had ever lived in. It had plush carpets, a fireplace, and a kitchen stocked with more food than she and Leo could eat in a month. Leo was ecstatic. He ran from room to room, his giggles echoing in the high-ceiling spaces. He discovered the joy of jumping on a soft bed and the magic of a refrigerator that dispensed ice. For him, it was a wonderland. For Ilara, it was terrifying. She felt like an imposter, a bird with brown feathers in a flock of peacocks. She worried constantly about breaking something, about saying the wrong thing, about not living up to the immense expectations that came with this new life. She threw herself into her work, focusing on Eleonora. The older woman was a delight, sharp, witty, and deeply grateful. She treated Ilara not as an employee, but as a friend, a confidant. "Alistair is a good man," Eleonora told her one afternoon as they sat in the sun-drenched conservatory. "He just closed a part of himself off a long time ago. He built walls so high, I don't think he remembers how to let anyone in." Alistair was a constant, brooding presence. He would appear without warning, his footsteps silent on the thick rugs, his dark eyes observing everything. He watched the easy way Ilara interacted with his mother, the genuine warmth in her smile. He saw how she cared for Leo, her patience seemingly infinite, her love a fierce, gentle flame. He started finding excuses to be home. A file he'd forgotten, a conference call he could take from his study. He would walk through the main house and find Leo sitting at the grand kitchen island, meticulously drawing a picture with a set of crayons the housekeeper had found for him. "This is for you, Mr. Ali," Leo said one day, holding up a piece of paper. It was a wobbly drawing of a stick figure with a thundercloud over its head next to a much smaller, smiling stick figure. "That's you being grumpy," Leo explained, pointing to the larger figure. "And that's me." Alistair, to his own astonishment, felt the corner of his mouth twitch into a smile. He took the drawing and, later that day, had it framed and placed on his desk, next to photos of billion-dollar contracts and architectural models. The house, once a silent, echoing mausoleum of his grief, began to fill with new sounds. Leo's laughter, the murmur of Alara's voice reading him a bedtime story, the clinking of teacups as she and his mother shared their afternoon tea. It was the sound of life, and it was slowly, painstakingly, breaking through his walls. He began to join them for dinner. At first, the meals were stiff and formal, the silence broken only by Eleanora's cheerful chatter. But Leo, with his complete lack of pretense, changed the dynamic. He would ask Alistair questions no one had dared to ask in years. "Why are you always sad, Mr. Ollie? Did you lose your teddy bear?" The question was so innocent, so profound, that it hung in the air between them. Alistair found he couldn't answer. Alara, sensing his discomfort, gently steered the conversation away. But the question remained, echoing in the empty chambers of Alistair's heart. He was beginning to realize that he hadn't just lost people. He had lost the ability to feel, and this woman and her child were, piece by piece, giving it back to him. One evening, a storm raged outside, rattling the large windows of the mansion's library. Alara had come to find a book for Leo and found Alistair standing in the semi-darkness, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at a large, gold-framed portrait above the fireplace. It was a beautiful painting of a smiling, vibrant woman with auburn hair and a little girl with the same fiery curls, her arms wrapped around the woman's neck. They both had Alistair's deep blue eyes. "They were beautiful," Alara said softly, her voice not startling him. It was as if he had been waiting for her. He didn't turn. "That was Clara," he said, his voice thick with an old, familiar pain. "My wife, and our daughter, Lily." He took a long swallow of his drink. "It was 5 years ago. A drunk driver ran a red light. I was in Tokyo on business. By the time I got the call, by the time I got back, they were gone." The confession fell into the quiet room, raw and heavy. He finally turned to look at her, and for the first time Alara saw past the billionaire CEO. She saw a man shattered by grief, a man who had been living in the wreckage of his life for half a decade. "I built this company for them," he continued, his voice cracking. "Everything I did was to give them the world. And in the end, all my money, all my power, it couldn't save them. It couldn't even buy me one more minute." Alara didn't offer empty platitudes or say she was sorry for his loss. Words were useless against such a monumental grief. Instead, she stepped closer and spoke of her own, different kind of loss. "Leo's father left when I was pregnant," she said, her gaze steady. "He wasn't a bad man. He was just scared. He couldn't handle the responsibility. Some days, the loneliness was so heavy I thought it would crush me. But then I would feel Leo kick, and I knew I wasn't truly alone. He saved me in that moment." They weren't employer and employee, rich and poor. They were two people who understood the landscape of loss, who had navigated the lonely terrain of a life different from the one they had planned. A bond formed between them, silent and profound, forged in the shared vulnerability of their exposed hearts. Later that week, as she was walking back to the cottage on a particularly chilly evening, Alistair met her at the door. He was holding a coat, a beautiful, charcoal-gray cashmere coat that felt softer than anything Alara had ever touched. "The nights are getting colder," he said simply, draping it over her shoulders. The coat enveloped her in a cloud of warmth and the faint, clean scent of him. It was more than just a coat. It was a gesture of protection, of care. It was him, wrapping his world around her, trying to shield her from the cold. She clutched the lapels, her heart doing a slow, unfamiliar flutter. "Thank you," she whispered. He just nodded, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. In that look, she saw the walls crumbling, and she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this broken man was finally finding his way back to the light. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet, burgeoning happiness that felt both thrilling and fragile to Alara. The grand estate began to feel like a home. Alistair, Alara, Leo, and Eleanora fell into a natural, comfortable rhythm that mimicked the family life all of them, in their own ways, had been missing. Alistair started leaving the office at 5 o'clock sharp, a feat his entire company had previously thought impossible. He'd arrive home not to the echoing silence of his mansion, but to the smell of something delicious cooking and the sound of Leo's excited shrieks as he played hide-and-seek with Eleonora in the sprawling garden. The domesticity of it all was something Alistair hadn't realized he was starving for. One afternoon, he found Leo sitting on the floor of his playroom, looking mournfully at his old teddy bear. The bear, a veteran of countless adventures and bedtime cuddles, had finally lost a button eye. "He can't see me anymore," Leo said, his lower lip trembling. Alara was busy with Eleonora, so Alistair, the man who outsourced every inconvenience in his life, sat down on the floor beside the boy. "Let me see him," he said gently. He took the threadbare bear and the loose button. He disappeared into his mother's sewing room and returned a few minutes later with a needle and thread. For the next hour, Alistair Vance, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire, sat cross-legged on a cartoon animal rug and painstakingly stitched the button eye back onto the bear. His large, capable hands, usually seen signing nine-figure deals, were clumsy at first, but he was determined. When he finished, he presented the mended bear back to Leo. "There," he said, a rare, genuine smile gracing his features. "He can see you perfectly now." Leo hugged the bear and then, to Alistair's complete surprise, threw his small arms around Alistair's neck. "Thank you, Mr. Ollie. You're the best." The simple, unconditional affection from the little boy struck a chord deep inside Alistair. It was a feeling of pure, uncomplicated joy, something he hadn't experienced since Lily was alive. He hugged the boy back, closing his eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of childhood and innocence. Alara, standing in the doorway, watched the scene with tears welling in her eyes. She was falling in love with him. It was a terrifying, exhilarating realization. She was falling for his quiet kindness, the hidden pain in his eyes, the gentle way he was with her son. And she could see, in the way he looked at her across the dinner table, in the way his hand would brush hers as he passed her a glass of water, that he was starting to feel the same. The house was filled with laughter. They had picnics on the lawn, built elaborate forts out of sofa cushions in the formal living room, and read bedtime stories together, with Alistair doing surprisingly good monster voices. It was a perfect, idyllic bubble, a honeymoon phase where two broken souls and a little boy were slowly, carefully, piecing themselves together to form a new, beautiful whole. Their perfect bubble was destined to burst. The world Alistair inhabited was not a kind one. It was a place of sharp edges, hidden agendas, and brutal social politics. The first sign of trouble came in the form of Victoria Davenport, a statuesque, immaculately dressed woman who sat on the board of Vance Industries. Victoria had been circling Alistair for years, viewing him as the ultimate prize in the city's social hierarchy. She saw his grief not as a wound to be respected, but as a fortress she needed to breach. The news of a mysterious nurse and her child living on his estate had reached her, and she was not pleased. She arranged to run into them at a hospital charity gala that Alistair had insisted Alara attend with him and his mother. He had bought her a stunning, simple navy blue gown, and as she descended the grand staircase, Alistair felt the air leave his lungs. She was breathtaking, but the evening, which had started with such promise, quickly soured. While Alistair was occupied with a donor, Victoria cornered Alara by the champagne fountain. "Alara, isn't it?" Victoria's smile was a slash of red lipstick that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "I'm Victoria Davenport, a very old friend of the Vance family. It's a pleasure to meet you," Alara said politely, feeling small and out of place under the woman's scrutinizing gaze. "I've heard so much about you," Victoria purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The angel of the bus stop. It's quite the Cinderella story. A poor nurse, swept off her feet by the billionaire prince. You must be pinching yourself." Alara stiffened. "Mr. Vance has been very kind to me and my son." "Oh, I'm sure he has," Victoria said, her eyes raking over Alara's dress. "Alistair has a soft spot for lost causes. But a word of friendly advice, dear. Fairy tales have a way of ending. Do be careful the clock doesn't strike midnight and you find yourself back in rags." The venom in her words was unmistakable. Alara felt a flush of anger and humiliation. Before she could form a response, Alistair reappeared at her side, his arms sliding possessively around her waist. "Victoria," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I see you've met Alara." His presence was a shield, his body language a clear back-off signal. Victoria's smile faltered for a second before she recovered. "Of course. We were just getting acquainted. I was telling her how wonderful it is that you've found someone to occupy your time." She gave them a final, poisonous smile and glided away, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and unspoken threats in her wake. Alistair turned to Alara, his brow furrowed with concern. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing," Alara lied, not wanting to cause a scene. "She was just welcoming me." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Victoria's words echoed in her mind, reminding her of the vast, unbridgeable chasm between her world and Alistair's. She was a guest in this fairy tale, and Victoria had just reminded her that she didn't belong. Victoria Davenport was not a woman who accepted defeat. Seeing the protective way Alistair had stood by Alara's side had only hardened her resolve. She hired a private investigator, a man with no morals and a talent for digging up dirt. "I want everything on Alara Jackson," she'd instructed. "Every job, every address, every secret. Find me something I can use." It didn't take long. The investigator uncovered a detail from Alara's past that, when twisted, could be devastating. 2 years prior, Alara had been fired from her position at City General Hospital. The context was crucial. She had blown the whistle on a senior surgeon who was working under the influence, a brave act that had saved a patient's life. But the surgeon was a major donor's son, and the hospital administration, prioritizing its reputation and funding, had quietly settled with the patient's family, discredited Alara, and terminated her employment under a vague personnel issue, forcing her to sign a non-disclosure agreement. It had left a black mark on her record and forced her into the series of low-paying jobs that had led her to that fateful bus stop. Victoria, however, saw only the ammunition she needed. She stripped the story of its context, leaving only the bare, damning facts. Alara Jackson was fired from her last nursing job. She leaked the information, along with a carefully curated set of photos showing Alara in her old, run-down neighborhood, to a notorious online gossip columnist. The headline was explosive: "Billionaire CEO Alistair Vance harboring disgraced nurse with troubled past. Is his ailing mother safe?" The article was a masterpiece of insinuation. It painted Alara as an incompetent, untrustworthy grifter who had been fired for malpractice and had cleverly manipulated a grieving billionaire and his vulnerable mother. It questioned her motives, her character, her very fitness to be near the Vance family. The story spread like wildfire. By morning, it was the talk of the financial world. The timing was catastrophic. Vance Industries was in the final stages of a massive, delicate merger with a conservative, family-owned European conglomerate. The scandal threatened to derail everything. Alistair awoke to a barrage of calls from his board members. An emergency meeting was called for that afternoon. The pressure was suffocating. They saw the story as a threat to the company's image, a liability that needed to be neutralized. The message was clear: fire the girl, distance yourself, and save the deal. Alara saw the article on a tablet the housekeeper had left in the kitchen. She read the vicious words, the twisted half-truths, and felt the floor drop out from under her. They had taken her integrity, the one thing she had left, and shattered it for public consumption. She felt sick. When Alistair found her, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, her hands trembling. She looked up at him, her eyes swimming with shame and despair. "Alistair, I can explain." He knelt in front of her, taking her trembling hands in his. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were filled with a fierce, unwavering belief. "You don't have to explain anything to me, Alara," he said, his voice a low growl. "I know who you are, but the world didn't." The weight of the scandal, the impending board meeting, the threat to everything he had built, it all hung in the air between them. Alara's greatest fear was being realized. She was a liability. She was going to be the reason he lost everything. "I'll pack my things," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Leo and I can be gone in an hour. It's better this way. I can't let you—" "No." He cut her off, his grip on her hands tightening. "You're not going anywhere. This is your home now. Let me handle this." He stood up, his jaw set, his eyes blazing with a protective fire she had never seen before. He was no longer the wounded man in the library. He was the king of this city, and someone had just declared war on his queen. Alistair walked into the emergency board meeting like a man walking into battle. The air in the 30th floor conference room was thick with tension. The dozen board members, grim-faced and anxious, sat around the polished granite table. Victoria Davenport was seated near the head, a look of smug victory on her face. She thought she had won. She had underestimated him. "Alistair," the chairman began, his tone grave, "this situation with Ms. Jackson is untenable. The optics are a disaster. The merger with Schmidt International is on the line. They value stability and reputation above all else. We need you to issue a statement immediately, terminating her employment and clarifying that your relationship was purely professional." Victoria chimed in, her voice dripping with false concern. "It's for the best, Alistair. She clearly has a checkered past. We need to protect the company. We need to protect you." Alistair let the silence hang for a moment, his cold gaze sweeping over each member of the board. Then he began to speak, his voice quiet but resonating with absolute authority. "There will be no statement terminating Ms. Jackson's employment," he said calmly. "Because she will not be terminated." A murmur went through the room. Victoria's smile tightened. "Alistair, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable." He cut her off, his voice hardening. "You, however, have been reckless." He gestured to his assistant, and a series of documents were projected onto the screen behind him. "You see, when I learned of this despicable article, I did some digging of my own. I discovered that Ms. Jackson was not fired for incompetence. She was fired for integrity." He laid out the entire story: the negligent surgeon, the hospital cover-up, the non-disclosure agreement she was forced to sign. He presented sworn affidavits from other nurses who had witnessed the event and had been too scared to speak up. He then displayed evidence from a forensic accountant, tracing the payment to the private investigator and the tip to the gossip columnist directly back to an offshore account owned by Victoria Davenport. The color drained from Victoria's face. She was exposed utterly and completely. "Furthermore," Alistair continued, his voice rising, "this woman you so easily dismiss as a liability is the kindest, most honorable person I have ever met. She saved my mother's life. She has brought light back into a house that has been dark for 5 years. She has shown more character in the face of poverty and hardship than anyone in this room has ever had to." He paused, his eyes finding Victoria's. "An attack on her is an attack on me, and I do not tolerate attacks on my family." He took a deep breath, preparing for his final, decisive move. He knew what he was about to do would change everything. "And to be perfectly clear about Ms. Jackson's role in my life," he announced, his voice ringing with conviction, "she is not just my mother's nurse. She is the woman I love. I have asked her to be my wife, and I pray every day that she will do me the honor of saying yes. She and her son are my future. So, if Schmidt International has a problem with that, then they are not the partners we are looking for. If anyone on this board has a problem with that, the door is right behind you." The room was stunned into absolute silence. Eleonora, who had insisted on being present, beamed from her seat at the end of the table. In one powerful, public declaration, Alistair had not only defended Alara's honor and destroyed her antagonist, but had laid his own heart bare, choosing love and integrity over business. He had become the man his mother always knew he could be. The spell was broken by the chairman, who cleared his throat and said, "Well, in that case, congratulations, Alistair." The merger, it seemed, was no longer the most important thing in the room. 1 year later, the sprawling gardens of the Vance estate were bathed in the golden light of a perfect September afternoon. The scent of roses hung in the air, mingling with the soft notes of a string quartet. It was not a grand society wedding, but a small, intimate ceremony for their closest family and friends. Alara stood under an archway of white roses, wearing a simple, elegant ivory dress. She looked at Alistair, who was watching her with an expression of such profound love and adoration that it took her breath away. The past year had transformed him. The sadness in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, steady joy. He was no longer a ghost haunting his own life. He was present, he was happy, he was whole. Leo, dressed in a tiny tuxedo, served as the ring-bearer. He walked solemnly down the grassy aisle, not carrying a satin pillow, but his beloved, fully mended teddy bear, to which the 2 wedding bands had been tied with a silk ribbon. When he reached the altar, he handed the bear to Alistair with a proud grin. As they exchanged their vows, their voices were steady and clear, promises of a shared future built not on wealth or status, but on a foundation of kindness, respect, and a hard-won love. Eleonora watched from the front row, tears of happiness streaming down her face. The angel from the bus stop had not only saved her life that rainy night, she had saved her son's soul. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Alistair didn't just kiss his bride. He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet as their guests cheered. Then he knelt down and pulled Leo into their embrace, holding his new family tight against his heart. They were a portrait of perfect happiness, a testament to the fact that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are merely the prelude to the very best. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, Alistair held Alara's hand, the new gold band on her finger catching the light. They had found in each other a safe harbor, a place to heal, and a love that was stronger than any storm. They learned that the greatest wealth isn't tallied in stock portfolios or stored in vaults, but is measured in the quiet courage of a loving heart that chooses to help a stranger in the rain. If you were moved by this heartwarming tale of love and redemption, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more soul-stirring stories. Your support allows us to continue bringing you narratives that celebrate the best of the human spirit. Until next time, remember that a single act of kindness can change a life in ways you can never imagine.